Jean Paullion, a computer scientist who was also interested in the UMO documents, agreed that they contained information of alien origin. In studying the Umaite letters and the glossary of alien terms used in the documents, Jean Paullion concluded that they could not be a hoax. In his book, UMO, True Extraterrestrials, Paullion explains how he came to this conclusion.
When I began working with these letters, I didn't know the theories surrounding them. All I had to go on was the information transcribed by Jean-Pierre Petit, and I wanted to find out more for myself, so I dug into the original source documents. These letters are difficult to read, and important information is never stated directly. It's only found by cross-referencing several of the documents. That means you need to spend a lot of time working with the documents, going through each one carefully and comparing them to each other.
These documents were disturbing to everyone, from UFO groups to the French National Space Research Center. No one wanted to admit that they supported this material, and that surprised me. Why was it so disturbing? Because people don't like to be led down unknown paths. Umaite material was not designed for scientists or UFO researchers. It's targeted towards highly intellectual people. I have friends who are mathematicians, and when they glanced at the material, they found it interesting and highly intellectual. Just look at the work done by Paullion, which was not done for amateurs. It was very highbrow. It required thousands of hours of work, so you can't make a judgment on his work based on a cursory glance of it, especially if you don't have the required qualifications.
To fully understand the scope and complexity of the UMO mystery, we need to go back to where it all began, in Madrid, Spain in the mid-1960s. The key figure involved was Fernando Sesma, a Spaniard who claimed to have been in contact with extraterrestrials from Venus and Mars since the 1950s, as well as other inhabitants of the solar system. Then, along came the Umites.
In actual fact, Sesma's group, the Happy Whale Club, existed long before the UMO mystery began. Sesma was interested in extraterrestrials and other esoteric subjects. A group of people would come to listen to him tell stories in the basement of a coffee shop in Madrid, where there was a huge smiling whale painted on the wall. Sesma was contacted by telephone on January 14, 1966. He then began receiving letters confirming the existence of UMO and letting him know that the next Umaite craft would be landing in Aluche on February 6th, 3 weeks after the first mail delivery. The letters were sent to Sesma, who spoke about them and mixed up the contents of the letters. Supposedly, the Umites did not appreciate him mixing things up, so they intentionally began adding technical information to make him lose interest. Sesma was a dreamer, not a scientist. So a lot of the technical information was over his head. Once the letters began to be filled with equations, Sesma started to lose interest, but people were still coming to hear about them, like engineer Enrique Villagrasa and Dr. Aguirre. These gentlemen and others began to receive the letters directly, and gradually they formed their own group, the famous Madrid group. They disassociated themselves from the Happy Whale Club, which continued to show interest in esoteric matters such as planets where butterflies laid eggs that hatched baby ducks. That's the sort of thing that Sesma cared about. After 2 to 3 years, they were no longer interested in UMO at all. In exchange for a modest sum, Sesma turned over all of his UMO documents to Fariols.
The Umaite mail packages, which bore an emblem resembling a letter of the Cyrillic alphabet, explained that they had been living on Earth since the 1950s. They were part of a scouting mission sent to Earth from a planet in the Virgo cluster, and the contents of the letters were designed to help advance humanity. The first Umaite packages were received by Fernando Sesma in 1966. He received several dozen letters each year for many years. Over time, the Umites found other human contacts. Spanish, French, British, and even American representatives began receiving these odd packages. The last Umaite correspondence was received in the mail in 1995.
Something is real until it's proven otherwise. These letters exist. I'm in the process of proving that they cannot stem from a human hoax because of all the ramifications that would involve. The contents of the letters themselves also prove it. I'm telling you that they are alien in origin because I have found strong proof within them to support that claim. They contain 1,345 words and more than 400 expressions, more or less coherent, that correspond to a language system having a base of 18 elements. That's quite something. It's real. And these Umaite reports contain scientific information that we have started to study on the internet. When I say we, I mean a study group that was created to review my work. This group now has more than 100 members throughout the world, primarily university students.
Martin Castello co-authored The Star Conspiracy, an investigation into the UFO affair. She was surprised to find that this odd story seemed to circulate under a cloak of secrecy, even among university students.
I was a science journalist working for Figaro, and I was in charge of the science page. I had to prepare an article on a scientist named Jean-Pierre Luminet, who had written about black holes. So I went to Meudon to see him. Since he was a longtime friend of mine, once the interview was over, I asked him jokingly, "Jean-Pierre, have you ever heard of UFO?" He grabbed me, and then he led me into the hallway and said, "Be careful where you talk about that." Yes, of course, I studied the letters when I was younger along with several other scientists. I examined the letters carefully and I pondered over the equations. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. The next week, I had to give another interview for Figaro. I went to Oxford, or maybe it was Cambridge, I don't recall, to see Stephen Hawking, who had just released a new book. Stephen Hawking is a physicist restricted to a wheelchair due to Lou Gehrig's disease. At the end of the interview, I asked him the same question. Have you ever heard of UFO? With one finger, he typed the word yes on the computer. I couldn't believe it, so I asked him if he could tell me more about it. He adamantly replied no and wheeled away. The interview was over.
Although some researchers are incredibly enthusiastic about UFO, others see it as nothing more than a very clever hoax. It's true that the whole thing has some suspicious elements, such as a series of photographs of an Umaite craft. In 1967, the Umaites announced in a mail package that one of their ships would be arriving soon. Then, on June 1st, 1967, an airship flew over the San Jose de Valderas area of Madrid. By the strangest of coincidences, a couple of photographers just happened to be at that location and took several pictures of the object. Interestingly, once the pictures were published in a major Madrid newspaper, the two photographers vanished into thin air, as if they had never existed. Jean-Jacques Velasco, director of France's UFO research group CEPRA, recalls that an investigation was carried out by his predecessor.
Yes, this matter pops up now and then. We hear about it in the media. It's quite simple, really. Our UFO research group was called Japan at the time, and our director, Claude Boer, discovered that a number of people in southern France were receiving strange packages in the mail. In these packages, the recipients found photographs of bizarre things happening in the sky. Claude Boer had one of the pictures analyzed, and it was shown that the photograph was nothing more than a model suspended from a nylon thread.
An independent investigation led by Ground Saucer Watch, an organization specializing in photo analysis, confirmed Boer's conclusions. By digitizing one of the photos taken in San Jose de Valderas, the experts had no trouble detecting the thread suspending the alleged UFO. Another controversial element was the quality of the information provided by the Umaites. According to Jean-Pierre Petit, The extraordinary things mentioned in the letters proved their alien origin. But was the information truly ahead of its time, as he claims? For example, Professor Petit said that the first packages from the Umites, dating back to 1962, contained references to parallel universes, which most physicists believe are composed of antimatter. Professor Petit claimed that no one on Earth could have imagined such a concept back in 1962. He used the same argument for magnetic hydrodynamics, or MHD, a principle of propulsion that consists of moving an object within a dense atmosphere by wrapping it in a sort of magnetic cocoon. Petit said that when the Umite reports mentioned MHD, it was a highly revolutionary principle for its time. Jean-Pierre Petit's main problem is a question of dates. The first Umite letters did not date back to 1962, but rather 1966. As for the scientific information, it didn't start appearing in the Umite reports until the late 1960s. Human discussions of parallel universes date back to 1967, when the idea was first proposed by Russian physicist Andrei Sakharov. Same thing for MHD. In 1966, as the UFO affair was just beginning, an American team was carrying out successful testing of a submarine powered by magnetic energy. In other words, contrary to what Jean-Pierre Petit claims, there was nothing revolutionary and probably nothing alien about the Umite reports.
The scientific information that Jean-Pierre Petit found in the Umite reports is undeniable and indisputable. It's there. He may have been a bit off with his dates, but what counts is the details of the information that he found. It's a fact that MHD was discussed in the Umite documents. It was just not discussed in the same terms as those interpreted by Jean-Pierre Petit. In my opinion, it was not being discussed as a means of propulsion, but rather as a source of energy.
The Umite letters are like a key capable of accessing the reader's intuition. They contain a lot of hidden information, and it took an imaginative mind like Jean-Pierre Petit's to find the building blocks of the ideas being expressed. Researchers everywhere did the same thing. I don't think the Umites gave any explicit explanations, and I feel that Jean-Pierre Petit underestimated the importance of his work. He was able to find 2 or 3 concepts in the reports due to his imagination and scientific intellect. What he accomplished was not easy, and it was a lot of hard work. The Umite letters stimulated his imagination. Everything that he came out with was not stated explicitly in the Umite reports. They only gave pointers.
The question remains, who wrote the Umite reports? If it's true that they were nothing more than a hoax, then it is generally agreed that they must have been produced by a well-managed organization. But who and why? In 1993, one of the key players in the UFO affair, José Luis Jordan Peña, admitted to having written the Umite letters. As an engineer, Peña had the knowledge required to have written these reports. But did he work alone, or did he have accomplices? Peña's confessions did not convince everyone, and especially not Professor Petit.
Peña's confession came at a time when I'd just received a package in the mail from Saudi Arabia, signed by the Umites, proposing that we meet. Who knows if it would have come about or not, but it was aborted due to an error made by Fariols. That was when Peña began acting odd, saying all sorts of things, like the fact that he had written the Umite documents. I was at Rafael Fariol's house when he and Peña discussed the matter. They had known each other for about 20 years, and by announcing that he had written the documents, Peña had made Fariols look like a fool. So Fariols was very upset. You know how Spaniards can get when they're angry. That's when I heard Peña say to Fariols, "Don't be mad, Rafael. The Umites were the ones who told me to do it."
Who are we to believe? Aliens flying on a craft suspended from a nylon thread, who order their agents to lie on their behalf to preserve their anonymity? Or José Luis Jordan Peña, a man tired of the 25-year cat-and-mouse game he'd been playing with UFO researchers who had been desperately trying to determine his identity? Will we ever learn all of the details surrounding the UFO affair?
It may linger on as nothing more than a dream until we get some definite answers, but we never will. The UFO affair is one of life's mysteries, like the quest for the Holy Grail.
In the mid-1990s, Raymond Santilli, a London-based film distributor, publicly announced that he had just laid his hands on a film showing an alien autopsy. According to Santilli, the film had been taped by a former U.S. Air Force cameraman who had turned over the 16mm reels.
I think it's suspicious that I was not invited to the original showing of the film, and even months before I tried to contact Ray Santilli, he ignored my requests to see the film. I'm convinced it's quite a clever fabrication done by various individuals, and I'm sure that their names will be known in due course. Now, Santilli, of course, maintains that it's genuine and that he's withholding more footage and so on and so forth. He talks about having supplied bits of the film for analysis, but he has never supplied any actual frames from the film for proper analysis.
The day after the autopsy film was first shown in 1995, several people claimed that it contained proof that it had been filmed later than 1947, such as the microphone hanging over the autopsy table and the telephone that appeared behind the doctors, which were said to be more recent models than those used in 1947. However, when we organized a private viewing at Bell Canada, technicians confirmed that the telephone was a 352, a commercial model used as early as 1941. As for the microphone, we checked with the technicians at Shure Brothers in Illinois, who advised us that the model in the film had been available on the market since 1942. In other words, there was no proof that the film had not been taped in 1947. Unable to prove that it was filmed later than 1947, analysts turned to a theory that it was possibly a clever trick, an argument countered by the exorbitant cost of such a production. Invited as an expert on a television program, Eric Gosselin said that he could prove this objection wrong.
On the TV show, I was challenged to recreate the autopsy film, and I accepted the challenge. I created an alien that I had to open up an autopsy, as was done in the Santilli film.
Eric Gosselin and his brother Carl produced a film whose sole purpose was to prove that Ray Santilli's alien autopsy could be recreated at a reasonable cost.
Obviously, I didn't have $200,000 to $300,000 to invest in my production. On top of that, there was the question of when my version would be aired. I only had 2 weeks to put it all together. I managed to get it done within the 2 weeks for less than $2,000.
Even though they proved that it was possible to produce something similar to Alien Autopsy at a reasonable cost, the Gosselin brothers in no way proved that Santilli's film was a fake. Further proof was still needed. Santilli was still keeping quiet about the identity of the person who had taped the film. Finally, after being bombarded with questions, the film distributor said that it had been created by Jack Barnett, a cameraman who had also taped initial testing of the atomic bomb south of Trinity, New Mexico. Research showed that only 2 cameramen were authorized to film those famous tests, and neither one of them fit the description given by Ray Santilli. The British producer also claimed that his film had been analyzed by the Kodak Film Company, who supposedly confirmed that it did indeed date back to 1947. There was something not quite right about this. We got in touch with Peter Nielsen, the person at Kodak's England office who had performed this alleged analysis. He wrote to us explaining that he never analyzed Santilli's film. However, he did admit to having studied a piece of film submitted by the British producer. It was a blank piece of celluloid used to hold the film on its reel. Based on the specific code appearing on this celluloid, Nielsen wrote that it was possible that it had been removed from a film dating back to 1947. He also cautioned that since it was void of any image, there was no way of proving that it had come from the autopsy film. Santilli distributes old American movies and could have easily taken this celluloid from any production dating back to 1947. No one has ever seen the actual film that the autopsy was taped on. Santilli generally shows the film on magnetic media with the pretext that the original reels are safely locked in a vault. He is, however, more than happy to show people the metal cases in which he keeps the reels. One of them has a suspicious-looking label. Other than a few mundane markings, the label bears the official stamp of the American Department of Defense. This raises 2 points. Firstly, if the film was never turned over to the Air Force in the first place, then why does it bear their stamp? Secondly, upon checking with the National Archives Office in Washington, D.C., it was discovered that this stamp was not made official by the U.S. President until October 1947, at least 4 months after the autopsy film was taped. A flaw in the film date had finally been found. John Spencer has written many books on UFOs, including an encyclopedia. For many years, he also headed the British UFO Research Association, or BUFORA, the largest UFO group in Great Britain.
Now, I have to say that there is so much evidence that it's a fake that that's where my feeling is. The way in which it came to light, the way in which the whole film is shot, it has a certain theatricalness about it. And when we compare it to actual autopsies done at the time and so on, actually it's not that good. It's not the way it would be done and so on. So there's an awful lot wrong with that film. The question that, of course, is paramount, I suppose, is was Ray Santilli the person who faked it, or was he a victim of the hoaxer himself? And on that question, I think the jury's out.
In the police world, it is well known that to find a culprit, you need to know who is profiting from the crime. To date, it is estimated that Raymond Santilli has made about $7 million on his autopsy film. P.T. Barnum is credited with saying, "A fool is born every minute." If P.T. Barnum was alive today, the showman would certainly be amused to see that one of his exhibits was passed off as an alien hand, that television networks paid several $1,000s to show the autopsy of a rubber mannequin, and that scientists are poring over letters of questionable alien origin in the hopes of finding revolutionary new ideas. If P.T. Barnum was alive today, he would no doubt be working in the field of UFOs.